Tiffany here, making a diamond piece binding, starting off with cutting 2.5-inch strips. Now I have my fabric stacked in 3 different colors, a white, a gray, and a black. So I have 6 layers going on here, but that's okay. Cut as many layers as you feel comfortable with. Secondly, we're cutting 2.5-inch strips. That's right, 2.5-inch strips by the width of fabric. Thirdly, if you cut 8 pieces for your binding regularly, this project requires 2 extra pieces, so you would cut 10. If you needed 5 strips for the regular project, you would cut 7. So after we get done cutting our 2.5-inch strips, we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and take that first piece and the second piece of the color order you want and lay the second one right sides together about 2 to 2.5 inches down from that selvage edge. And you don't have to worry about chopping the selvage edge off, because the next step after pressing will be cutting it off anyway. So I'm just finger pressing each, sewing it on and finger pressing each individual piece to the side to make the next part of pressing seem simpler. I am keeping my 1/4-inch seam. That is very important, to keep your 1/4-inch seam all the way down. When you're making these units, I make them in units of 3. Now if you have a really large cutting mat, you can actually make them in units with more than 3. But I find it easier to just make strip units of 3, especially since my color order in this specific binding is going to be white, black, gray, white, black, gray, over and over again. So yeah, I finger press them to the side, making the next step easier. And remember, these are 2.5-inch strips by the width of fabric, and I'm sewing them in groups of 3 strips in the color order that I want. Right sides together with a 1/4-inch seam throughout the whole entire strip, pressing to the dark. Okay, here we are at the pressing step. Now I am on a binding board, so it kind of makes this a little bit hard to get the full length of the strip on one board. But here I am pressing from the wrong side, I am pressing on the wrong side, pushing those seams back, giving a little bit of a tug so that it pulls that seam open all the way from the front side. Then flipping it over, make sure it's laying straight, the seams are nice and open, and giving it a good press, making sure I am not distorting or bowing my piece at any point in the pressing, which is really easy to mess up if you're not paying attention. So I fold it up and make sure that it's aligning just right. Here you see me do that step one more time. I have the right side facing the ironing board, pressing the back of the seam first, and then rolling it over to press the front, trying to straighten it out. Keeping it nice and straight, no bowing, giving plenty of steam. Try to get all the wrinkles and folds out. This way, right here, I'm going to press the seam first, warm it up, then roll it back, relaxing that fabric. I have found that this way is the easiest and most best way, and afterwards it lays really, really flat. It's just really hard to do on a small ironing board. But keep your pieces nice and flat, no stretching or pulling, and you won't distort any of it. Here I am taking my pressed strips and lining 3 stacks on top of each other, and then I'm going to take those 3 nicely. I don't have a really long cutting table in here, so the small one I have to do, lining it up on the 45-degree line. Find the 45 on your mat and line it up on that. Then I'm trimming off those ends, making sure that all those ends are lined up and it catches all the ends of those seams at the end where you made every piece further down. And then I am subcutting this whole entire strip into 2.5-inch strips, cutting them on the 45-degree angle. You can also line up the 45-degree angle on the top of your ruler and or whatever ruler you're using to make sure that you have a straight line along with the 2.5-degree line. I actually use the ruler markings instead of the board for this type of cuts. So I just keep them nice and flat and straight, cut 2.5-inch strips off of these long strips. And I try not to move them around too much, keeping them on the 45-degree angle the whole entire time. And I couldn't get one more. Lots of pieces. Here I am again, aligning another 3 strips together, as straight as I could possibly align them, keeping them all level with each other. Don't worry about the seams. If you want to do this one piece at a time, you can. It's not that hard to stack them up, but I'm kind of in a hurry doing this actually right now. So I decided to stack them up, and yes, those seams make it harder to cut through. And I line them up on the 45-degree line. I trim off that first edge. I find my 2.5-inch marking on my ruler, and then I line up the 45-degree part on the top as well, so that I have a more accurate cut, making sure both of those lines match up. And then I just keep it on the 45-degree line, moving it down as needed, and cutting my 2.5-inch strips. With a fresh blade, you can cut through these 3 layers and the seam allowances. And I line them back up again, trying to keep them nice and flat on top of each other, not distorting them in any way. On the 45-degree line, subcutting 2.5 inches, which gives a big stack of diamonds, already pieced. Here I took my stack that I finished subcutting over, and I am putting them right sides together with my next, just one right after the other, making sure that I have that 1/4 of an inch sticking out just like any other diamond. So lining them up with a 1/4 inch sticking over on each end, that way when you fold it back it lays nice and flat. And then I just finger press the seam, lining it up right sides together. It creates a V that will fall right at where your needle comes down if you sew at a 1/4 of an inch. It is good to be as precise as possible with your 1/4 of an inch seam, and if it's not precise, make it consistent with each and every individual 1/4 inch seam. That way when you open each piece up, the whole row lines straight. And I'm just finger pressing them out of the way, sewing each 1/4 inch seam, grabbing another piece, sewing that seam, pressing it to the dark, lying it right sides together, giving that straight line when you get that seam right. And then I cut off all the dog ears. That way they're not in when you get to the final step of this. Just piece after piece. Here I'm showing you how to chain piece. What I do is I line them all up and I leave them on the machine, folding over the end as if I was doing regular binding. Obviously my pieces are stacking up and you can't see what I'm doing, but they are all connected together. I am folding over one end. Kind of hard to tell. And I clip them all apart. Making one long seam. So I do it all over again. I try not to get too big of a pile, but as you can see right there now, you can see it. I'm just rolling that end piece over to where my right sides become together again. Grab it, fold it over, right sides together. You can pin it if you need to, like I'm showing you. See how I rolled that over? So I sewed it right sides together, flopped it over so that they'd be right sides together again, flopping it over to be right sides together again, and just repeating the process. And then when I get a big stack, I like to pull them out of the way. I realize that you probably couldn't see them anyway on the camera, but I'll clip them apart when I get a nice big stack, and then just keep sewing more together. I sewed them in groups of like 15, and then sewed those groups of 15 all together, and snip them all apart. And then I opened them all up to check, and they all lined up just as like they were supposed to. Here I am pressing all the seams to the dark, only because I have white in this pieced border here. So I'm just pressing all those seams, and I'm pressing from the back. Do not tug or pull at this, because now you have a 100% fully on the bias strip. This is 100% bias binding now. So there's a lot of tug and pull to this, especially since it is pieced. And I make sure they're nice and flat, and then I trim off all those dog ears, because we don't need those in there when we go to that last and final step. And it made it easier to press them all when they were in groups of like 15. What I'm making here is enough binding for a queen size quilt. So I just keep pressing them, and then I press from the top after I press those seams back, making sure that my rows are nice and flat. If you sewed your diamonds correctly together, they should straighten right up all the way down. Here you can see the last and final step, which is folding the binding in half. Now remember, this is very, very, very stretchy, and with all these pieces, folding it half is just a little bit harder than making regular binding. I'm at an odd angle. Normally I press the opposite way, but because I was trying to record this so that I can share how to make it, I was pressing to where you can see me. So I'm just folding it directly in half, aligning both of those seams up once it's folded in half, making sure it's one nice straight piece. And I do use a lot of steam. I press with the heat first, and then I steam it. So I carefully fold it over, give it a little bit of a heat, and then I steam it on the way back up, making sure that it's nice and flat. Here we are, finishing up on that final step. I'm coming to the end of this strip of binding. Like I said a minute ago, do not stretch or pull on this, because like I said, these diamonds are super stretchy. Super duper stretchy. If you were using batiks, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be as stretchy, because they don't seem to be as much of a stretchy fabric, but this is definitely a stretchy fabric, and when it's cut on the bias, it's super stretchy. So I'm giving this a lot of steam as I go, coming here to the end. Took me about 25 minutes to press it, which isn't that bad, but you have to take a little bit more attention to pieced binding. And all my seams were pressed nice and down. I know the video doesn't look like it because of the angle, but they were flat as I could get them. And then I just pressed them and made sure that they all stayed flat inside the seam that I was closing together. And we're pressing this wrong sides together, by the way, just so you know. And now you can see me. I like to roll it all up. I kind of make this weird stack, and I just keep going for a little while, but I think I was starting to not be able to be seen on camera, so I change what I'm doing. But I make a big stack and I roll it, and then I wrap it. It kind of makes like a donut when I'm finished, which you will see in just a moment. But as soon as it's done, to keep it together, instead of wrapping it around something, I kind of just fold it up like this. And I'll lay it on its side and then roll the rest of the binding around it to hold it all together. It's a pretty nifty way to store binding. And it also keeps it from getting messed up and tangled up and folded up. So again, I thank you. Like and subscribe for more of my quilting life. I thank you for watching, and I hope that this helps you in the future to make a pieced diamond binding. It's quite simple once you do it the first time, that more times will become easier and easier and less time consuming. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.